go very quickly through Living with Beauty, which was the final report of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which was established by the UK government at the time. It was an independent commission, and it reported independently. And this is going to be sort of 5 minutes or so, reflecting over 12 months of work throughout 2019 by a very committed team of people. It started by considering why so many people are this new development when they know that we need more homes, that we still have a housing shortage that is still acute in many areas of the country. But the Commission went far wider than that, as was just touched on. You know, it was looking at the impacts of climate change. It was thinking about how we tackle inequalities before levelling up became the phrase that's top of the political agenda now. And it started from an understanding, even pre-COVID, of that deep correlation between where someone lives and their mental and physical health and well-being. And at the earliest stages, we spent hours debating whether beauty was the right objective. We were challenged that should we just be saying it's about quality? Would that be easier to define and achieve? But I think everyone involved in the Commission felt that beauty should be a legitimate outcome of the planning system, that quality should not be an aspiration, it should be an absolute prerequisite for any development happening. And beauty is undoubtedly a subjective measure. It is really hard to define, but it isn't about architectural style, which is what I think a lot of people thought the Commission was going to be discussing. When we tell someone about somewhere special we've seen, we don't say, you know, I've just seen the most high quality, well designed, sustainable development. We would say, oh, I've just seen a really beautiful place or a beautiful building. So we instinctively know what beauty is, and it's not just what it looks like, as we've just heard with the European Bauhaus. It's that wider spirit of a place, something that feels right and feels like it belongs, and that it lifts your spirits when you're there. And I can't remember who said it during the Commission, but someone said beauty's like a smile. If you're asked to describe it, it's really difficult, but you know what one is when you see it, and it makes you feel good. And this is a quote I've used many times. If we're trying to define it, a lot of it is that memory of a place, that sense of belonging it gives you. And, you know, again, if I asked you to close your eyes and think of a beautiful place, it would be the memories of what you were doing in that place that would really spring to mind. You know, who you were with, how you were feeling, what was the sounds, the colour. It's all of the senses. And one thing that I really did learn from the Commission, that it's the beauty of everyday life that's really important. It's not a statement of high art, that people want to live in beautiful places and live next to beautiful places. So the Commission actually considered beauty at 3 scales. Yes, we looked at beautiful buildings, but that isn't just one architectural style versus another. It's that it's the right design in its context. We really focused on how spaces in between buildings work, and then it being beautifully placed, making sure that development happens in the right sustainable locations, and that it feels like it belongs and it respects its landscape. Which sounds obvious, but actually it doesn't always happen. And particularly with all of the discussion we've had with COP26 and so on, with climate change really at the top of the agenda, we have to develop in a more sustainable, resilient and respectful way. And we talk a lot about at place level, you know, 20-minute neighbourhoods, mixed use communities, garden villages that offer a better quality and way of life. But all of the evidence, as one report that was published at a similar time to the Commission, suggests we're still creating car-dependent commuter dormitories. We have to think about how people will need to live in their communities in the future. And one of the hardest things that we were reconciling was a government committed to beauty and setting us off on a commission that was also extending permitted development rights, allowing redundant offices and warehouses and so on to be converted to homes. And this example, thankfully, didn't happen because an inspector stopped it at appeal, noting that living without windows was not a positive living environment, which really is stating the obvious. So we've got the government has since moved on minimum standards and ensuring things like light and so on. But actually, they're also extending permitted development rights. So I think there's still some tensions and conflicts there. So the Commission made 45 policy recommendations around these 8 themes, which you'll be glad to know I'm not going to go through today, but please do have a look at the report, because they're not just about the planning system, but how we procure, how we fund, and how we deliver new places, and even the tax regime that surrounds the property industry. That we need to remove the speculation from the planning system that drives down quality and only seems to benefit the financial returns to the landowner, that we shift the development model from only thinking about short-term profits to thinking about long-term investment and value creation, that we broaden the education and skills for the professions so that people don't work in silos, and that we involve communities fully and democratically in the future of their area. But perhaps above all, that we stop talking about house building and units and we talk about placemaking and creating homes. So the government published its full response 12 months after the report was published. It has introduced beauty into the national planning policy framework. So it is a benchmark for development, and it has empowered planning authorities to refuse schemes that are deemed ugly. It did launch its planning white paper to look at a fundamental reform of the planning system, but actually that's hit the buffers because of public reaction to it. And I think it perhaps didn't heed one part of the report, that for too long, one of the issues has been that people feel development is done to them. It's not done with them, and they rarely feel that it's for them. So we really do have to think about that democracy in the places. And just to conclude, we published the report 2 months before COVID hit and we went into the first lockdown. And sadly, 2 weeks after our original chair, Sir Roger Scruton, died. And so looking back now through a post-COVID lens, does what we're saying really hold true? And I think it does, because every single one of us has experienced our homes in a different way. We've had to work, learn, exercise, spend 24 hours a day there. And our home needs to be our anchor and our sense of permanence in a very, very challenging world. It's where we put down roots. It's where we find peace. So I think we need to make sure now, and I think a real focus for the conference is we're creating homes that fully understand that fundamental need that they meet. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And you touched on it then. You said there was a sort of a public reaction or a public backlash to this idea that people feel that development is imposed on them. But also, how can we create a consensus? If you seem to be saying a similar thing to Lorenzo, that beauty is an outcome of getting everything right rather than a stylistic decision. But how can you get people to agree on that? Because obviously the property developer, a beautiful development, is the one that makes the most money rather than the one that is the most environmentally friendly or that has the most happy residents.
I think there is an increase in awareness of the link between the two, that actually you do create value by creating the kind of environments that people want to live in. So I think the biggest pushback to the Commission was perhaps by the architectural profession to start with, that they felt that for a start, none of the commissioners were architects by background. We did have a team of advisors that involved them. But I think once the report was published and people understood actually what we were saying, it was this thing about doing it right, that the development model is very much how much does it cost, how much can we sell it for today, and that's the end of it. Whereas the most successful places commercially that we were looking at did derive a premium because they put that investment in quality in early. And that sort of generated those returns for the developer, for the landowner, but also for the residents over time.
And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Lorenzo. I mean, obviously, if you take it that style isn't part of beauty, but you could, so therefore, could you create a development that ticked all the boxes in terms of sustainability and people were happy and things like that, but was a kind of neoclassical style, and then you could do one next door to it, which was a brutalist style, and they both perform the same but look very, very different. Does beauty, is one of them no more beautiful than the other? And what about the kind of aesthetic clash between the two of them? I struggle to find that you can't leave aesthetics out of this conversation.
No, I mean, I think it's true. I think that sense of belonging is the important thing, because you can have a very, very modernist development that is absolutely right in the context it's being developed. You know, we shouldn't be building things where everything looks like it was built 200 years ago. You know, this isn't about a pastiche or a neoclassical style. It is getting it right for the context that it's been developed in. And some of the, you know, I live in an area where design coding has been in place for a long time in the Cotswolds. So it's an area of outstanding natural beauty. And there's been a lot of new development. A lot of it has gone through on planning appeals, but they've all followed the code. And actually, everything is a lovely quality, without doubt. You know, you walk down a street scene, it really works. But actually, the vast majority of it, you really can't tell one developer from the other, because they've all followed the same pattern book. And I find that a little bit disappointing, because I think you have those moments of delight where you see something that still works in its context, uses the right materials, but does it in a way that really makes a statement about when it was built and when it was developed. And actually, around where I live, the one development that did it was a retirement complex, and it's an incredibly modern architecture, but it's absolutely compliant with the design code. So I think you can, you know, still use imagination. We need to make sure that actually by looking at things like codes, they're not just there to prevent the worst from happening. They need to still enable those real surprises, those fantastic designs that are those memorable ones. And I think some of the examples that we looked at, you know, going across the whole of the UK, they were the ones that were the most memorable.
And final question for you. You were talking about, you know, in the UK, we do tend to build housing developments that you need a car to get through. There's no services there, particular. Now, in the neighbourhood I live in North London, the council has put in a low traffic neighbourhood. The idea is to stop cars cutting through residential streets to make a shortcut on their way to wherever they're going. And that's caused huge controversy. Yeah. So clearly, there are some people that think a beautiful street is one where the children can play safely. And there's another bunch of people that think a beautiful street is one you can drive down as fast as you want to get to where you need to go. How do you reconcile those completely different views?
I mean, I think there must have been an awful lot of highways engineers and designers whose ears were burning during the commission, because actually that was one aspect that we felt would make or break a place. And I think we have to give alternatives for people. It's not enough to say, you know, that you can walk and cycle everywhere. We've got to put that investment in breaking that connection to the car. And I think, you know, we're not necessarily looking at it right. I quote things like parking standards. We now will quite often have planners driving down the number of parking spaces, which actually then people still own cars. So they park them on streets and they stop children being able to cross safely. We need to separate car ownership and car usage. And in the first instance, give people real alternatives. I think I work on large scale developments. You know, what I do, it can be up to 10,000 new homes and new infrastructure. The first thing that's always sorted is the roads. You know, the getting people in and out there, enabling congestion and that to be tackled. And until we start really putting that infrastructure investment into the right kind of infrastructure that will enable people to have more sustainable choices, it's always going to be that tension that you described where you live.